Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Amanda Kramer, and I am the Alumni Engagement Program Manager at the University of Colorado Boulder's Leeds School of Business. These are certainly trying times, and we have gathered our world-renowned faculty and alumni to provide frank and timely insights for life during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Today is the second webinar in our COVID-19 related webinar series. For this webinar, we're excited to have Leeds alumnus Scott Kingdom, Vice Chairman of Korn Ferry, here presenting on leadership in a crisis. A few housekeeping items before we begin. First, if you have any questions now or during the presentation that you would like to ask Scott, please send a question through the chat interface. We will monitor questions as they are submitted, and Scott will respond to them at the end of the presentation. As a reminder, for optimum audio quality, we do have everyone on mute except for myself and our speaker. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please notify us through the chat interface, and one of our support specialists will touch base. Lastly, a link to access the webinar recording will be sent to all registrants tomorrow, along with the survey link and supplemental resources from today's presentation. Now, I would like to introduce today's speaker. Leeds alumnus Scott Kingdom is a core member of Korn Ferry's board and CEO services team. His focus is on the coordination and delivery of the firm's array of talent advisory services to client organizations. He has been acknowledged by BusinessWeek as one of the 100 most influential search consultants in the world, and for 3 decades, he has served clients in the leadership and talent development arena across a wide range of businesses and solutions, such as executive search, board, C-suite, succession, leadership development, talent assessment, and talent transformation. Scott currently serves as a board member for Youth Guidance in Chicago, as well as the University of Colorado Leeds School of Business. He is also a board member and trustee of the University of Colorado System Foundation. Welcome, Scott, and thank you so much for being here. I'm going to hand the controls over to you now.
So hopefully everybody can hear me okay. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry we're under these circumstances, however. I wish we had a different presentation today for a different situation. But I know everybody's going through the same thing. So hopefully everybody's in a safe environment, and I hope everybody's family is okay, first and foremost. So it's a pleasure to be here. The topic of leadership in a crisis is certainly a timely one. For those of you who may know Korn Ferry, you know we've been in the leadership business for over 50 years and essentially have spent our whole time assessing, attracting, judging, coaching, developing talent, really, all over the world in every sort of industry. And it isn't just business. It's in athletics, it's in the military, it's in the arts, sciences, wide variety all over the world. So we've had an interesting chance to look at leadership at its finest and not so finest times. And through our research, our science, our observations, our experiences, we've been able to put together a pretty interesting look at what separates leaders in good, better, best circumstances. And make no mistake about it, this time we're in now is certainly going to separate leaders and leadership. And so what I'd like to do today is sort of talk about and try to share some things we've learned in our experience, that I've learned in my experience having run businesses around the world. We've assessed over 70 million executives, so we've got a pretty good idea of what extra looks like. I'd like to share some of that with you today, and I look forward to some Q&A if that's an opportunity. So with that, let's jump in. So let me start with this. There's sort of an easy first context setting here. There's lots of ways to judge leadership and judge top leadership. I could give you all kinds of adjectives. I could give you all kinds of lists and slides. I could fill up the day with slides. Let's talk about the very top 20% of leaders. And very top 20% by our books and our analysis is outcomes, performance. And it's very easy to take a look at the first 3 here or so, and they're on everybody's list. Vision, strategy, driving growth, financial acumen. You could put several more in there. They'll come up on everybody's list. They'll come up on your lists if you think about how to differentiate top leadership. What does not get talked about enough, and it's lurking in our assessments, is the next one down there you see, managing in a crisis. The top 3 I consider to be table stakes. They're a given. They have to be. If you can't do those things, you're not really going to be a leader. You're certainly not going to be a successful leader. What we've found is leadership is separated very quickly when in times of trouble. And this notion of managing in a crisis is actually a real thing. You can judge it, you can assess it, you can see it, you can test for it, you can predict it. And those who are able to do this in this environment will set themselves apart significantly, not just individually, but more importantly, their teams, their people, their organization. Again, it doesn't matter if it's a business or anything. Being able to manage in a crisis is absolutely critical. And of course, we find ourselves in that today. I'm going to move to a little bit. So let's talk about what a crisis does to people. It's probably somewhat self-evident, but our research and our work and our study actually tells us some very specific things happen. Stress, ambiguity, uncertainty. I could give you some more adjectives, but these are three particular ones. If you're feeling it, which I'm sure you are in some way, anybody on your team and everybody on your team is feeling it. Every personal characteristic and behavior of your team, and typically yourself as leaders, is accentuated in these times for the good and for the bad. Everything has gotten a factor of, you call it 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. So the good things can be really good. The tough things can be tough. And I want to talk about 6 things here that researches out as being very critical. And we'll get into some more of these in depth as the presentation goes here, but I just want to make you aware of them. So this top 20% that I referenced earlier, these top of the top leaders do these things particularly well. This notion of anticipating, critical, what lies ahead and what to do about it. Everybody shuts down in times of trouble. Vision narrows, everything gets focused. But those who can anticipate out ahead, out in front, and do something about it, set themselves apart. Secondly, this notion of empowerment. It's a word that's thrown around a lot. It's an easy cliche, but this is something that's critical. The notion of most leaders, when things go badly, they usually turn inward and say, I'll do it. I can fix it. It's all on me. I'll make all the decisions. The truth of the matter is those who succeed the best actually go exactly opposite to this. They do not take the command and control position. They turn outward, they gather their team, they collect their team, they empower their teams, and it's through that mechanism that you drive a number of other things, which we'll talk about in this presentation. But empowering the team is critical. Navigation, of course, is imperative. The piece of info I want to give here is this course correction comment here in real time. You can navigate all kinds of ways, but the very best leaders will change directions very quickly if they have to. If the information, the circumstances, the times change, they can recorrect very quickly and change. That's not an easy skill, but the good ones do it. This notion of communication next, I'm sure again, another easy cliche, but it's really, really critical. I'm going to just go out on a limb and suggest that all of you who might be in leadership roles probably are over communicating today more than you have. I'm going to tell you that it's probably not enough. I'm going to tell you it's probably not as often as it needs to be, because in any kind of vacuum, in a crisis, bad stuff fills it. Rumors, fear particularly, spread quickly. So you cannot communicate enough, often enough, or more transparently. Critical. Kind of with that communication piece comes this next one, this notion of listening. The very best leaders will seek out and listen to things that they do not want to hear. They will look for bad news, and then they'll deal with it. They'll absorb it, they'll handle it, they'll try to solve it, they'll deal with it. They do not run from it. They will seek it out. And so critical, a real separator actually. And then the last one, which will come up in a theme here through this presentation, is the notion of learning from your past experiences. If you're in a leadership role of any kind, of any size, chances are you're there because you have experiences that others don't have. nobody's got a playbook for this environment we're living in. It looks good on paper. You can have one on paper, and it can be worthless by dinner time. So nobody really knows what's going to happen. The folks that do the best in this are the ones that have learned from their past experiences, good and bad, and they are not afraid to apply those to current situations. I mean, after all, there's nobody that knows your business probably better than you do. You know your instincts, you know your people better than anybody else. Trust your instincts, trust your gut. It matters. Chances are you will be more right than you are wrong. And if you're wrong, you can change it. So critical, trust yourself. You're a leader for a reason, trust yourself. We work on a framework, particularly currently, and have been doing research and creating some intellectual property around this notion of what you are, who you are as a leader, essentially what you need to be, and then what you actually do. So this is a little bit of a simplistic presentation without killing you with slides on the things that you really need to be, how you show up, how you present, kind of what you are. These things will give you permission to do the next things, to actually do things. People will do things if they trust you, if you're calm, if you're confident, if you'll be courageous, empathetic, resilient on the left side there. If you come across that way, and we'll go into these in more detail in this next slide, then you'll get permission to do what's on the right side. And that is to really make things happen, and you'll be received in a better way. The folks who do these things on the left side, do them well, and they are kind of who they are, have the ability to influence people and organizations far better than those who don't. So let's go into this a little bit more deeply. So those same 5 things are here on who you are. What do you need to show up as a leader? The very best ones do these things and more, but the research in our study would suggest these are particularly mission critical. So the notion of calm, you can see what that is there. I'm not going to read every word here, but I want to just put a couple of highlights on here for you. I talked about, in the first bullet, I talked about the notion when things get bad and you're under fire, everybody's natural tendency is to shut down, to draw down. There's health and medical reasons for it. The reality is you've got to fight that as a leader. You've got to go exactly the opposite to that. You've got to open up. You've got to open your eyes, open your ears, open your brain. The more you do that, the more information the good leaders take in. They can process it faster. They have greater clarity, and they can act upon it. If you shut down and if you get so focused that you're tunnel visioned, you'll lose the game. You'll lose it. The comment on confident and positive, the next one I want to touch on, is the first point, not being a cheerleader. Cheerleaders wear out, burn out. They wear out very quickly. They become, coaches lose locker rooms. CEOs lose their leadership teams. Board chairmen lose their boards by being cheerleaders, empty suits, information, it's a bunch of happy talk with no content. You'll lose your locker room quickly that way. Instead, just be dead straight honest. Be direct, be linear, be transparent, and trust your judgment, to my earlier point about trusting your judgment. You know your stuff, rely on it, but don't just give a bunch of happy talk. It wears out very quickly, you lose your credibility. Courageous, another term that gets thrown around a lot. I want to focus really on the first point here, this notion of being willing to launch. 2 things, really. You will have to make decisions with incomplete information. The best leaders can do this comfortably. They know they don't have all the info. They will make decisions the best they can. It's incomplete. They know it's incomplete, but they will launch and they will correct. They will course correct. Secondly, they will hang in there. They will preserve. They will not give up. They will persist. Even without knowing they'll be successful, they will launch. So that's key. Now we're going to come to the 4th one here, which happens to be the one that I think is the most valuable. And I think I could have very well put it first. To me, the very best leaders are the ones who have empathy. it's a little bit of an intangible skill. A lot of people refer to it as essentially meeting people where they are. All of you probably have your own view of empathy. This is critical. It's my number one first hurdle and gate for leaders. True leaders, enduring leaders, have natural empathy, and they have transparent and genuine empathy for what's going on around them and their people. Last is resilience, resiliency. Probably a given, but there is no way to overstate the importance of hanging in there and stripping out things that take your energy and take the energy away from your organization. Simple, simple, simple. And we're going to come back to that theme in a minute.
We just talked about be, now we're into do. Let me launch a poll for this one, leadership action. So it's most important for a leader to blank during a time of crisis. To do what? I will launch the poll now. So please, attendees, vote here. Let us know what you think. We'll give it 5 more seconds. And then here are the results. Communicate by a landslide.
Yeah, what a surprise. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So let's talk about that a second. That is one, I mean, you could argue circumstances and businesses and cultures would dictate which ones you might prioritize here. And so I'm going to make a comment on each of these just to, and by the way, our research would show communicate comes up top in some. Keep it simple actually comes up near the top as well. So I'll make a comment on each. I will repeat myself a little bit, but this vision, if you will, where this is most important is in this difficult balance as a leader to fight the daily battles that we're all going to be in right now. And the challenge with that is if you only do that, you may not have an enterprise left at the end of the day when things turn around. You may be behind the 8 ball and you may not survive. So the very best leaders have some ability to tackle the here and now, but keep enough attention on the vision to do things that when we kind of call it accelerating out of the curve when it's ready, when it's time. And that might be a drastically different business model. Our business, for example, over the 50 years and all the upheavals that we've seen, we've taken these as times to drastically change our business, perhaps. And it has served us well, and it's served many others well. So it's a chance to rethink everything you do, because a short period of time ago, we would have never thought we'd be holding a conference of 200 plus people on a desktop like this. So something's going to change, and you either need to own it or you're going to run over by it. Again, I touched on the communication piece. You all understand that it's bad things fill a void, so fill it yourself. We talked about act, clarity, etc. I want to talk about the last one, the keep it simple. This is a very, very real thing because there's a lot of noise in the system, a lot of static in the signal in times like this. The best leaders remind their people of what's important and why, constantly, over and over again. And they strip out ruthlessly anything that gets in the way of that. Anything that's noise goes away. And this notion of the main thing, keep it the main thing is the main thing, is very, very real. So this shows, research, science, all shows that this notion of keeping it simple has huge returns. Now, I put the word essentialism at the bottom of this. Very, very important, certainly to me and all the work that I've done and I do now with executives. I use this a lot. There's a book written by Greg McKeown, McKeown, called Essentialism. That's why I put that on there. It's a great book on this subject. It's an easy to read book. You'll zip through it quickly. A lot of it will be common sense, but it is a Bible for getting things done in a very efficient manner and stripping away stuff that is not a value creator. Because if you're not creating value today, whether you're a brand new employee or the most senior CEO or a board member or a coach or a military admiral or an entertainer, if you're not creating value somewhere to somebody, you're expendable. You're going to get lost. So got to take care of that and pay attention to that. So Amanda, why don't I ask you to flip to the next screen, please? Great. Just to put a little more point on this, I want to flip this view from the leader to the employee for just a minute, for a couple slides here. What are your employees feeling? What are your teammates feeling? What are your coworkers feeling? What are you likely feeling? And there's very much a notion of, hey, what do we need more of, and what might we need less of? And so there are some things here that are well researched and we talk a lot about. And it's probably not surprising to you that the notion of prioritization and focus, everybody benefits from that. This mentoring, this connection, everybody wins. And some of this notion of meeting, planning, and turning it into action, of course. What I want you to focus a little bit on what is that people need less of. And they need less distraction. They need less overload. They need less scheduling, scattered that doesn't make sense, as you can see. We all know what that is. We're all subject to it. We all are guilty probably of it. So on the far right, I want to just draw your attention here for a moment. These little 3 bullets are pretty important to think about and how your teammates might be thinking, which is particularly now when we're home and locked down in many cases, it's easy to assume that everybody's got all kinds of free time. In many cases, that's absolutely true. But in many cases, that's not true. They may be caring for sick, they may be caring for children at home that weren't planned, on and on and on. So be aware of this. This is sort of this empathy. Be tuned into that. A lot of leaders who take control as their natural reaction will clamp down on every bit of rules and regulations, and they'll turn into the sort of the chief compliance officer. Not the time for that. Don't do that. Good leaders don't do that. They ease up. They understand the needs. Keep inside the white lines. Got it. But now's not the time to clamp down on that stuff. Maybe last and importantly here is that your teams are not all the same. The message can't be the same to everybody. So they're not one group. Voters don't vote in one block, nor do your teammates, your peers, your team members. So the notion of some bespoke approach here is really important. Good leaders do this really, really well. They're very cognizant of it. Amanda, can we flip to the next one? So what to do with all this? I know I've thrown a lot of things on slides at you. This slide is a little bit of a cheat sheet. Can easily be taken, folded up, put in your pocket, carried on your phone. And it's sort of how to use this stuff. And you can use it in any number of ways. It's applicable all over the place. Things like, if you're going to help, it's a checklist. If you're going to help some young members of your team, for example, you can use this setting up agenda items for staff meetings. You can use it to brainstorm. I see a lot of executives will use an outline, a framework like this to just sort of slow their own roll a little bit, do a little self-examination, and just check their own ego a little bit and their own actions. Often we will see executives, we help executives use these frameworks to judge their own teams, pick their own teams, pick their cabinets that they rely on and empower, as I talked about earlier. And they judge them. They can coach and judge against this stuff. And so you're all aligned. And then lastly, this is a way for feedback. You can give feedback on these dimensions. And it's clear, it's understandable, and you can tweak them the way you wish, but it allows you to give a chance to feedback, which is powerful. How about one more, Amanda? Okay, I'm going to stay on the employee side for a second. This is something that came out of the 2008 crash, the financial crash. We started to do a ton of research on what we call engagement and motivation, because some organizations came out of that, this acceleration out of the curve, far better than others. Even though they might not have had the best product, they maybe not had the best strategy, they didn't have some of the advantages other companies did, yet they came out the best, most successful with leaders who did different things. And here are 3 pieces of this, which are going to be critical for all of us. You got to be thinking about what your teammates and employees are thinking about. So this notion of what is work, what makes work work, we found 2 things critically important to this. This notion of engagement, which we've all heard about, and enablement. So probably not difficult to grab either one of those. But what we found is those businesses, those leaders that could impact and influence those 2 things won the day, significantly won the day, separated themselves, top 20% and then some. Those who couldn't move those dials, who didn't pay attention to those things, they didn't invest in them, didn't pay attention to them, didn't measure them, didn't care about them, struggled differently. So how do you move those dials? So the next 2 pieces are parts of this stuff. This notion of distraction and frustration are very real, particularly now, obviously, critical now. So you as leaders have got to do everything possible to get rid of this stuff. You got to get rid of the distractions, get rid of the frustrations. Not easy to do. It will not be perfect. There might be one set of things this week. It might be something next week. But good leaders, good coaches, good commanders have a way to do this. They pay attention to it, they do it, and they understand what these people are dealing with, and they try to remove these things. The other piece is again, learning from these past problems. And what we learned was those who were able to pay attention and invest behind this, measure it, care about it, really recovered more quickly. And I would dare say that there are going to be lots of winners and lots of losers coming out of this next period of time. And it's going to come down to the leadership of all of us as leaders and what we do and how we do some of these things. It will make a difference. It's proven to make a difference. So Amanda, let's hit one more, which I think brings us. So we as a firm are now, because of clients' requests, we're starting to put our research out there for everybody to take a peek at. So you can go on this link. If you've got a scan scenario, you can go to there. But we're putting out things once a week, if not more, about a whole number of subjects on leadership, on business management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It comes out of our research institute. That's very current, very interesting, validated, et cetera. So we've tried to put some science alongside the art form here. So I welcome all of you to do that. It's you might find some of these are interesting readings to share with others. So with that, I will stop, Amanda, and turn that over to you for any potential questions or any direction you'd like to take it.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Scott, for that information. Let's move into Q&A. We'll take a few questions. Feel free to chat us a question and I will ask Scott. We'll start with the first one here. In times of crisis, how do leaders prioritize competing stakeholders? For example, investors, customers, employees, others?
Yeah, interesting. There's a real debate in the boardrooms now going on around stakeholders. It used to be really quite simple. You know, you were lined up as, hey, customers first or investors first, or some would say employees first. Lots of movement around that. Today, that's getting very, very mixed. I think what I think the best leaders you're going to see do right now is concentrate on their teams, their employees, and being value added to their customers in whatever way. They may be repurposed, but I think you're going to see the vast majority of the ones who succeed have figured out a way to be valuable and value added to their customers, and that with employees will probably be where the where the breakout comes. But it's difficult. Competing demands are difficult for sure.
Okay, thank you for that, Scott. We've got a question from John. He said, thank you very much for your time and these insights. In the current environment, do you have thoughts on how you can balance increased communication and authenticity? Seems abundant communication can come off as lip service or cliche sometimes, or sometimes lead to overwhelming confusion that just becomes white noise.
Yeah. Yeah, John, that's a battle of any leader. It's a very good question. It sort of speaks to my earlier comments about don't be a cheerleader and when you're going to communicate with value and something that adds something. So the notion of this is sort of this empathy thing. It's got to be communication with a purpose, and it's got to be clear. The opportunity for mixed signals is significant. My fallback with my teams over the years around the world and the clients that I work with tends to try to land on genuine caring. It doesn't have to be a lot of communication. It could be frequent, but make it meaningful and make it personal and show up personally. Will go a long way I think for everybody.
Great. We have a question here from Valerie as well. Do you have any suggestions for how to identify motivation gaps and then act upon them with your team?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So some of the answer to that depends on whether or not you've got any experience with engagement surveys or any structure in place that would have been giving you insight into any of that as well. So let's just assume there have been no formal mechanisms that way. These times people are going to show, as I said, they're going to get, their traits will be accentuated. So you're going to see lack of engagement. You're going to see lack of enthusiasm. You might see quality of work diminish. You might see showing up late. You might see just sort of folks checking out on things. It's going to be hard. You're going to have to really have your antenna up for things that you wouldn't, 60 days ago, we would not have been looking for. So I think if you see a change in behavior, a change of engagement, a change of that, be very, very aware of it. I also would tell anybody listening, you're going to have to pay particular attention to your top performers, what I'll call the A performers. The top performers want to be around other top performers. And as organizations get stressed, the care and feeding of your top performers, this motivation of your top people, the best performers are going to be critical. Otherwise you may lose. You're more likely to lose your top performers than your bottom ones. And that's something to be very careful about.
That's a great point. Thank you for that. We have another question here. This is from Daniel, a different perspective. How do we apply these concepts in managing up? I can lead in my capacity as an individual, but how do I support the people leading me in this crisis? Also, is there a way for me to speak up when I see that a leader is possibly misstepping?
Well, yeah, so there's a couple of things there. So my advice has long been, and it's more so now, because I get asked this, as you might guess, a lot, on the notion of managing up. Managing up is a real thing. It's important. It's necessary. We can't avoid it. But at times like now, if leaders are worth a hoot, they're looking for good ideas. They're looking for somebody to help them. They don't need more problems. They need solutions. So back to my comment a few moments ago, the best way you can help, or the best way a new, younger employee can help, is be engaged, be willing to help, volunteer, raise your hand, bring solutions, bring ideas, bring value. And it may not be at all related to your job description. It may be something completely different. It may be you raise your hand to volunteer to do something unrelated. You're going to help somebody else on a project. Add value and be there to help full speed and be visible. To your second point, Look, I'm not naive enough to think it isn't a little bit tricky to step in and say, hey, I think, the call of the emperor's, without clothes. I get that. So I think you got to do it in the right way that's constructive. Attack the problem and not the individual, obviously. Gather some consensus around you if you can. Get some influencers with you if you can, and make your case and make sure you've got it well thought out and well delivered. Because again, they're looking for solutions way more than they're looking for more problems.
That absolutely makes sense. Great. We're moving into the final two questions here. So the first question is, one of the challenges I'm finding with communication is the speed of change and the fact that one communication could change direction completely in minutes, hours, or days. What is the best way to help my team adjust to the pace of change and be more nimble in times like these?
Well, so nimble is something that being nimble is something we put under an umbrella called agility. And there's actually there's various 5, 6, 7 kinds of agility. Emotional agility, intelligence agility, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of agility, which would take a whole podcast by itself. That's a very good question, because some people are simply wired differently for agility. My experience firsthand would say, and watching it, is not everybody is going to be as agile as you're going to need to be, or as that you want them to be. So you're going to have to pick your places. This is kind of picking your cabinet, right? Pick your team and keep your messages very on point, very crisp, clean. And as you need to change them, be very careful and be consistent about that change. If that sort of sounds like an oxymoron, but everything's going to change. The news, the briefing we're going to get on TV today at 5 o'clock will give us something that will change our tomorrow. So you're going to have to identify people that can be culture carriers and can run the speed that you're running at. And you're going to want to empower them. It can't all be through you. And you're going to have to unleash them, turn them loose, and be a force multiplier for you. The best leaders are the ones that actually can figure out how to get force multipliers on their team, because you can't do it yourself. You just can't.
That absolutely makes sense. And I think this last question here from Heather, it plays into what you just talked about to some extent. She shares, we do a weekly recap of current events at our business and in the world. It's basically a weekly newsletter for employees. If you were writing this, what points would you put in for employees to know at this time?
Well, it's interesting. I've been involved in writing a number of speeches lately on this topic of what do you tell people? What is it? I guess one of the benefits of having been in leadership roles now for 30 plus years is, we've seen the crash of '87. I've managed through '01 and '08 and SARS and on and on and on, as many of you have too, I know. And, I think what I would say is this will get better. This will change. It will change everything we do, probably. This will make us rethink our environment. But out of all of this disruption, I guarantee you there will be winners. There will be innovation, particularly in the United States. We have led the world in innovation in times like this. You can just look at what's going on to fight this virus and the sort of public and private partnership things that are going on that are solving and tackling issues that never would have done before. So we will get through this. You will be successful. You need to work very hard. You need to figure out how do you add value in places everywhere you can. And we will get through this. We will be different, but we will get through this.
Great points. Thank you so much, Scott. And, we actually just had one other question come in from Carl. I want to make sure to address it. Could you please restate the book and author that you referenced during your presentation?
You bet. The book is very simply called Essentialism, and it's written by Greg McKeown. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. It's McKeown. terrific book. I've given it to clients, candidates, coaches, my doctors. They love it. It's great. It's become actually, a doctor friend of mine has put it into his curriculum at Northwestern Medical School. It's really terrific. I highly recommend it. It's an easy read. You'll get a lot out of it.
Wonderful. Thank you for addressing that. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us for today's presentation. And a special thank you again to Scott for this great information, both in your presentation and during Q&A. As a reminder, all webinar attendees will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording of this presentation. To view upcoming webinars in our COVID-19 series, as well as previous recordings, please visit our website at colorado.edu/business/alumni. We hope to see you on Monday for our next webinar on optimizing virtual teamwork. In the meantime, have a great rest of your day and go Buffs.